Welcome to Geir's Everything, the podcast ranging in subjects from sex to astrophysics. This is podcast number 15, and I'll talk about being a better public speaker, even without slides. Or maybe even preferably without slides. First, I'll take you through my journey from being an introverted, terrified of speaking aloud, speaking in front of people, reading aloud in class. I was so terrified that at one point in high school, when my teacher asked me to read aloud, he usually asked people to read 4 or 5 pages. I couldn't get through a paragraph because I read so many mistakes, at least twice per sentence, and apparently so funny mistakes that Håvard, who usually sat beside me, was no longer sitting. He was rolling on the floor with laughter, with my whole class as a choir laughing with him. And I thought, beam me up, Scotty, I don't want to be here. And I started hyperventilating. And one of my classmates took me down to the hospital down the street, where I can sit and breathe in a paper bag for half an hour until I cooled down. I was so terrified to speak in the class or speaking in front of people or reading aloud that that was my nightmare in school. Now, when I was 18 years old, I did a couple of communication courses that catalyzed a change in me. But it wasn't until I got to get on or into a local radio station because I was an eager listener to a radio show called Beatbox. And the radio show host, he said, yeah, come in and, we'll have some fun in between the cuts where he was on the air, etc. But when I was there with him, all of a sudden he said, do you want to come with me into the studio and introduce some music? And I thought, that's what? Are you kidding me? But something in me just went, this is really uncomfortable. This is my nightmare. I should challenge that fear. I should do it. So without further ado, I just said yes, and I went into the studio. And I was about to introduce this music, which I thought I did. I actually thought there was physical sound coming out of my mouth, hitting the microphone and going on the air. But nothing came out of my mouth, apparently, because this radio show host, he was like gesticulating and he was pointing to the microphone and my mouth and everything. And then all of a sudden he just started the music and he said, what's going on? Why didn't you introduce the music? I said, but I did. No, you did not. There is no sound. And he played back the recording. There was no sound. And I thought, wow, I'm really out of this. I was so terrified. I didn't even know. I didn't even realize that there was no sound coming out of my mouth. So by luck, bad luck, or chance, when I was 23, I got to become the CEO of a recruitment company. And I thought, I have to deal with this horrible, traumatic terror that I had in speaking in front of people. So I realized the way to do it was to arrange free recruitment seminars. Every week, we would invite 5 to 10 people where I would give them knowledge, tips, a talk about recruitment, how to recruit people, any type of position in a company, how to deal with interviews, how to deal with the reference checks, how to deal with the second interview, maybe some testing, how to sift out the candidates from the CVs or resumes, how to get underneath a person's facade, how to get behind his mask, how to get whether he is the right or she is the right person for the job. And there are many facets, how to write a recruitment ad, all kinds of stuff I could cover. But I decided early on I would not cover it through a set plan or a template. I would just ask the audience, every one of them, what do you want to get out of this seminar? What do you want me to cover? And some people focused on the interview, some people focused on the reference checks, some people focused on the sifting out the candidates, etc. So various aspects of the recruitment process. Even how do we deal with a person if we do a misrecruitment? How do we get him out again? And every audience had their focus But I asked every person, and I jotted down every point on the whiteboard. And then I said, okay, so you guys take a cup of coffee, and I'll arrange your points into a logical set, the sequence of how we're going to cover these points during the next 2-3 hours. And I made sure I really covered every point, and at the end of the seminar I asked them, so did you get your points covered? And they all nodded, because I was making sure that I did actually cover every point. So I got a 9 or a 10 out of 10 every time, usually a 10 out of 10, because they got what they really wanted. Now, if I were to make a set of slides or a plan or cover what I think they would want to have covered, I would certainly miss the mark. I would never get a 10 out of 10, or I could get a 10 out of 10, but I would usually get a lot lower score, because this is what I did in the beginning, right? So I knew there was something I could do to tailor the seminar better to the audience. And the best way to do that is obviously just to ask them. Not come in to a talk or workshop thinking I would know what they wanted. So this sort of culminated with a talk I did at the university just outside of Oslo, where somebody had seen me on stage before, and they wanted me on stage on this, the last party or the last workshop, talk, speech, funny event they had at the end of the semester. And they had all kinds of speakers up on stage, and there was this comedian who was the master of ceremony introducing everybody. And I said, yeah, I'll do that, but on one condition. And that is, I will have no heading. There will be no idea or any hint of what I'm going to talk about. And they said, sure, I'll give you an hour. No, please come. I said, okay, cool. And I made a point in my own head that I would not prepare for the talk. I would not have any ideas what I was going to talk about until I was walking up on stage. And she introduced me, this comedian, and I started walking up the stage. The point is, there was only 3 small steps to get up on the stage. And that was not enough time for me to even get an inkling, a clue of what I was going to talk about. So I turned around, saw 350 people, half drunk, really in party mode, and I thought, I'll just ask them. So I said, you can get anything now in subject, from sex to astrophysics. That's where that idea came from, the range of this podcast also. And one lady raised her hand and said, I'm fed up of getting the wrong boyfriend, and now my boyfriend just left me, and I'm picking up the wrong boys every so often. So if you can give me some tips on how to pick up the right boy, that would be fantastic. And I asked the other ones, okay, so do you want a course in picking up the right partner? And they went, yeah, that's what we want. Yeah, cool. So I did an impromptu, completely improvised picking up a partner course, which is possibly a podcast I can do in the future, how to pick up or how to make friends with people, how to pick up a new partner, how to get people in bed. All that was covered in my 1-hour speech at this university, and they were like really blown out. It was real fun 60 minutes. And I got people on stage demonstrating my ideas and picking up each other, and it was all kinds of fun going on there. Much laughter, and it's probably the best talk I've ever did. Now, I lost this idea that I would have crutches or a set plan going into a speech or a talk or a workshop where I was thinking I would know what they would like to hear about. I'm now completely, this was about the year 2000, maybe a bit later, and I was totally disabused with this idea of having a set plan going into a workshop. I also was asked around 2000 to have a talk for IBM. This was the CEO of IBM. He said, we have this big strategy with Linux, and we know you're a Linux guy, and we want you to have a talk about Linux to our 35 biggest clients in Norway. So can you please send me the slide set? And I said to him, I don't have slides. And he pressured and said, this is a professional talk and you have to have slides and blah, 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 blah. Very, very conservative guy. So I gave him 1 slide. So I got on stage, and there was a white slide with black text, and it said, "This is a boring slide, look at the man who's talking." And I did my talk, as usual. And the next guy came on blushing and said, "I got 37 slides here." And he had slides with all kinds of text, and people were laughing, and he was, he was okay with it because he joked about it anyway. But that was a big contrast. Now, I made a point also through my years to always challenge myself, not just with what I've already told you, but also if somebody wants some person to have a talk in a wedding, I raise my hand. In the beginning, that was my stomach objecting. No, don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. But I did anyway, because I knew that overcoming this fear was the way forward. This was the way for me to challenge myself, to get out of my comfort zone, and I knew if I did it enough times, I would get good at it. And if I did enough times with slides, I would be good at doing it with slides. If I did it without slides, I would be good at doing it without slides. If I were pushing myself to be good at improvising, even more so every time, I could get to the point where somebody could put me on stage to talk about any subject, whether I knew it or not, and I will not make a fool out of myself. I would actually make an impact with the audience. But there are, of course, valid times where you could or should even use a slide, or several, if you must. And one is as a background image, just to have something nice in the background. I prefer doing whiteboards or flipovers instead of slides, because then I know where my audience's attention is. It's actually at the tip of my pen. But if I put a whole big graph or tables or whatever on stage or on the slide, then they will be all over the slide and I will not know where each person is. But if I do some drawings, I know it is at the tip of my pen. But for some complex graphs, tables, equations, or specific illustrations, slides can be of help. And also if it's a very short and very strict presentation where you cannot do much improvisation or where you cannot be very interactive with the audience, then you can also do slides. But I prefer not to in any case. Because thinking that something will be the right sequence for the audience is folly. Now, my tips for you, if you're going to be a very good public speaker, even without slides, is to first decide on the impact you would like to make with the audience. What type of result would you like to create with that audience in that setting? What impact would you like to land with them? And that to do that, you need to be interested and not trying to be interesting on stage. You need to have the focus on them and the impact you have to make or want to make with the audience, and not what you want out of it or how you look on stage or how they perceive you or whether you fumble or whether you have a dry mouth or whether whatever. You need to be focused on the impact you make, not what they will think of you. Now, in preparation for such an event or a talk or a speech or a workshop, put down some key words or key phrases that makes that impact likely. Instead of using slides, just put down some lines, some bullet points that you will cover, but not necessarily in that sequence. Use those bullet points as Lego building blocks. You can jumble them, if somebody asks some questions, you can just play with your bullet points back and forth. You can jump out on a little tangent, you can go a little side trip out in the woods, you can do stuff, you can create a little story, you can, talk about other stuff, but just use them as Lego building blocks. You used Lego when you were a kid. You can do the same thing with the bullet points when you are on stage. Now, pay attention to the audience. Pay attention to what they grab, how they react to the various things you put out there, and whether you can see, if you can see somebody, forming a question in their head, you can just stop and say, okay, sir, did you have a question? Ma'am, did you want to say something? And then be prepared for whatever is coming and answer their questions. Go roll with the audience. Go where they want to go, but make sure you create that impact, something valuable. You want to make it valuable for them. Be there for them. Be interested rather than interesting. And also be transparent. Be yourself. Say what you feel, what you see, what you experience. If you feel nervous, just say it. Some people say you should never show a weakness. You should never, show your feelings. Forget that. Fuck that shit. Just say whatever you experience, whatever you feel, whatever comes to your mind. Be natural. Be like it is in your own living room with your friends. Just say whatever you like, but make sure that you keep your attention on the audience. Be interested rather than interesting, and make sure you create some valuable impact with your audience. Now, these are my tips for this podcast. Thank you very much for listening.